The farmer's lantern was still swinging from the rafter when the lightning struck, and by the time Lucas Thorne smelled smoke, he knew the barn was already lost. He had been checking on the mare. She always got skittish in storms, and the first crack of thunder had sent her into such a panic that he had stayed to calm her, one hand on her neck, murmuring nonsense until her breathing steadied. The dry lightning had been dancing along the ridge all evening, white-hot forks against the black sky, and he had thought about moving the animals but decided against it. The barn was stone at the base, good timber above. It had weathered 30 summers. It would weather one more storm. He was wrong. The smell hit him first, sharp and wrong, and then he saw the glow through the gaps in the planking. The hay in the loft had caught, probably from a spark that drifted through the roof vent, and the whole upper structure was beginning to smoke. He got the mare out first, then the 2 cows, shoving them toward the paddock gate with slaps on their rumps. The chickens scattered in a flurry of panic. He went back for the winter feed, the sacks of grain he had spent 3 months gathering, and that was when the beam came down. It caught him across the shoulders and drove him to his knees, pinning him against the stone floor. The pain was immediate and totalizing, a white shock that blanked out thought. He tried to push up, but the beam was old oak, thick as a man's torso, and it did not budge. Smoke was pouring down now, filling his lungs, and he could hear the fire roaring above him like something alive and hungry. He thought, very clearly, that this was a stupid way to die. Then the barn door exploded inward, and someone was there. She was green-skinned and tusked, with shoulders like a woodcutter and hands that looked like they could bend iron. She took one look at the situation, crossed the floor in 3 strides, and got her shoulder under the beam. Lucas tried to tell her it was too heavy, that she should leave him, but his voice came out as a cough. She did not seem to care. She heaved, muscles standing out in cords along her arms, and the beam shifted. Not much, just enough. "Crawl," she said, and her voice was low and rough, like gravel underfoot. He crawled. His shoulders screamed and his legs did not want to work properly, but he dragged himself forward across the stone while she held the beam aloft, shaking with the effort. As soon as he was clear, she let go and grabbed his arm, hauling him upright with a strength that was almost casual. They made it out the door just as the loft collapsed, sending a geyser of sparks into the night sky. She dropped him in the dirt 20 paces from the barn and stood there, hands on her knees, breathing hard. Lucas lay on his back and watched his livelihood burn. The flames were beautiful in a terrible way, gold and orange against the black, consuming everything he had built. The hay, the grain, the tools, the roof timbers he had cut and shaped himself, all of it going up like kindling. "You are unhurt?" the orc woman asked. He turned his head to look at her. She was tall, maybe 5.5 feet, built lean and strong with muscle that spoke of hard labor rather than idle strength. Her hair was dark, tied back in a braid, and her tusks were small, barely jutting past her upper lip. She wore travel-stained trousers and a leather vest, and there was soot smudged across her cheek. "I am unhurt," he said. His voice sounded strange to his own ears, flat and distant. "Thank you." She nodded once, then turned and walked away. He sat up, ignoring the protest from his back, and watched her go. There was a herd of cattle in the field beyond his fence, dark shapes against the grass, and she went to them without looking back. A drover, then, passing through. She must have seen the fire from the road. The barn burned all night. There was nothing to be done about it, no way to save anything, so Lucas just sat in the dirt and watched. At some point he realized he was shaking, though whether from cold or shock he could not say. The mare and the cows had huddled together in the paddock, as far from the flames as they could get, and the chickens had disappeared into the darkness. He should check on them. He should do something, but he did not move. When the orc woman came back, she had a blanket, rough wool that smelled of cattle and road dust, and she dropped it over his shoulders without a word. Then she sat down beside him, close enough that he could feel the warmth of her, and they watched the fire together. "I am Cara Oral," she said after a long silence. "Lucas Thorne. This is your land. It was my father's. Now it is mine." He pulled the blanket tighter, "or what is left of it." She was quiet for a moment, then said, "The animals are safe, that is not nothing." He laughed, a short bitter sound. "The animals are safe and I have no feed for them, no shelter. Winter is 3 months away and I have nothing. You have your life." "Do I?" He looked at her, really looked at her for the first time. Her eyes were dark, almost black, and there was something in them that he could not name, not pity, something else. "I am sorry, that was unkind, you saved me, I owe you my life. You owe me nothing." She stood, brushing ash from her trousers. "I should return to the herd." "Wait." He did not know why he said it, only that the thought of being alone suddenly seemed unbearable. "Will you stay? Just for tonight. I have coffee, or I did, if it did not burn." She looked down at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she sat back down. They did not talk much after that. The fire burned itself out as the sky began to pale in the east, and by the time the sun rose there was nothing left but blackened timbers and a heap of ash. Lucas stood and walked to the ruin, the blanket still around his shoulders, and surveyed the damage. The stone foundation had held, the rest was gone. "I am sorry," Cara said behind him. He turned. She was standing a few paces back, her arms crossed over her chest, and in the morning light he could see the exhaustion in the set of her shoulders. She had been up all night watching over him and a fire that was none of her concern. "Why?" he asked. "Because this is a loss." "It is." He looked back at the ashes. "But you did not cause it, the lightning did, or I did by leaving the lantern burning, so do not apologize." She nodded slowly. "I must move the herd today. We have been on the road for 2 weeks and they need better grazing." "Where are you headed?" "South. To the market at Milford. If I can sell them for a good price, I will have enough to buy land of my own." He heard the longing in her voice, the same longing he had felt when his father first told him the farm would be his one day, the need for a place to belong, to build something that would last. "I hope you get it," he said, and meant it. "Thank you." She hesitated, then added, "If you need help." "With the rebuilding, I could stay a few days." He stared at her. "You would do that? You need help, I can give it." She shrugged, a quick awkward motion. "I am strong, I can lift things." Despite everything, he smiled. "I noticed." That was how it started. She moved her herd into his upper pasture, where the grass was thick and green, and they began the work of clearing the ruin. It was slow, back-breaking labor. The timbers were too charred to salvage, so they had to be dragged away and stacked for firewood. The ash had to be shoveled and scattered. The stone foundation had to be checked for cracks. Lucas worked until his hands bled and his back felt like it would break, and Cara worked beside him, never complaining, never slowing. They did not talk much during the day. The work was too consuming, too exhausting, and words seemed superfluous. But in the evenings, when the sun had set and they sat by the small fire Lucas built outside his cabin, they talked. Small things at first: the weather, the herd, the best way to stack firewood, but slowly, carefully, they began to share more. "How long have you been a drover?" Lucas asked one night. 5 years. Cara was whittling a piece of wood, her hands steady and sure. "I worked on a cattle ranch in the north until the owner died and his son sold the land. I took my pay in cattle and started moving them south. That must be lonely." "It is." She did not look up from her whittling. "But it is also free. No one tells me where to go or what to do. No one looks at me and sees only tusks and green skin." He heard the bitterness in her voice and understood it. "People are fools. People are afraid. There is a difference. She set the wood aside and looked at him. You are not afraid. Should I be? Some would say so. Some would say I should have left the grain and saved myself, Lucas said. I do not put much stock in what some say. She smiled at that, a quick flash of teeth, and he felt something warm settle in his chest. The days turned into a week, then two. The ruin was cleared and Lucas began to plan the rebuilding. He had some money saved, enough to buy timber and nails, but not enough to hire help. That meant he would have to do the work himself, and it would take months, maybe longer. He tried not to think about winter, about what would happen if the barn was not finished before the first snow. Cara stayed. She did not say why, did not offer an explanation, but every morning she was there, ready to work. She helped him cut timber from the woods at the edge of his property, hauling logs that would have taken him 3 trips in one. She held the beams steady while he nailed them in place. She climbed up on the frame without hesitation, balancing on the narrow supports like she had been born to it. You are good at this, he said one afternoon, watching her notch a crossbeam with practiced ease. My father was a builder, she said. I learned from him. Is he still alive? No. He died when I was 16. Raiders. She did not elaborate and he did not press. They worked in silence for a while, the sound of hammers and saws filling the air. Then Lucas said, I am glad you stayed. She looked down at him from her perch on the beam, her expression unreadable. So am I. The neighbors noticed, of course. Lucas's farm was on the edge of the settlement, far enough from the village that he did not see people often, but not so far that gossip did not reach him. The first to visit was old Marin, who lived on the next farm over, a dour man with a face like weathered leather. Heard you have an orc working for you, Marin said, leaning on the fence and eyeing Cara with undisguised suspicion. I do, Lucas said, not bothering to correct the assumption that she was working for him rather than with him. That is trouble, boy. Orcs are not to be trusted. Cara saved my life. If she wanted to harm me, she had ample opportunity. Maybe. Marin spat into the dirt. But people are talking, saying it is not right, an orc on human land, saying she might have had a hand in the fire. Lucas felt anger flare hot in his chest. The fire was caused by lightning. I was there, I saw it. You sure about that? Convenient, her being so close when it happened. Get off my land, Marin. The old man straightened, his eyes narrowing. I am just saying what others are thinking. Then others are fools. Now leave. Marin left, but Lucas knew the damage was done. The seed of suspicion had been planted, and in a small community like theirs, seeds like that grew fast. He told Cara about it that night, and she listened without interrupting, her face carefully blank. I can leave, she said when he finished, if it will make things easier for you. No. The word came out sharper than he intended. No, I do not want you to leave. Lucas, you saved my life, Cara. You have spent 2 weeks helping me rebuild, asking nothing in return. If people want to talk, let them talk. I do not care. She looked at him for a long moment, and he thought he saw something shift in her expression, something that might have been hope. Are you certain? I am certain. She nodded once, and that was the end of it. But Lucas could feel the weight of the village suspicion pressing down on them, a silent, invisible thing that made every interaction feel fraught. The second visitor came a week later. His name was Darren Moss, and he owned the largest farm in the area, a sprawling spread of fields and livestock that made Lucas's small holding look like a garden plot. He rode up on a fine bay horse, flanked by 2 of his sons, and dismounted with the air of a man who expected to be obeyed. Thorne, he said by way of greeting. Moss. Lucas set down his hammer and walked over, aware of Cara watching from the barn frame. What can I do for you? Heard you have been having trouble. Fire, was it? It was. Terrible thing, fire destroys everything. Moss's eyes flicked to Cara, then back to Lucas. I also heard you have an orc camped on your land. I do. That is a problem, Thorne. People are worried. An orc this close to the village, it is not safe. Lucas kept his voice level with effort. Cara has done nothing wrong. She saved my life and has been helping me rebuild. That is all. So you say. Moss folded his arms across his chest. But how do we know she did not start the fire in the first place? Orcs are known for that sort of thing. Burn a man out, then offer to help so they can take his land. That is ridiculous. The fire was caused by lightning. Was it? Or did you just assume that because it was storming? Moss's voice was reasonable, almost kind, which made it worse. Think about it, Thorne. You said yourself you left a lantern burning, but who is to say someone did not move it? Set it near the hay. Lucas felt the ground shift under him. He had left the lantern on the hook by the door, well away from anything flammable. He was sure of it, almost sure. But the night had been chaotic, the mare panicking, and he had been distracted. Could he have set it down somewhere else and forgotten? I know what I did, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Moss heard it. Do you? Because from where I am standing, it looks like you have been taken in by someone with ill intent. And I would hate to see you lose everything because you were too trusting. Get off my land. Lucas's hands were shaking. Now. Moss raised his hands in a placating gesture. I am just trying to help, Thorne. Think about what I said. And think about whether you want that creature anywhere near your home. He mounted his horse and rode off, his sons following, and Lucas stood there in the dirt, his mind churning. He did not believe Moss. He did not. But the seed of doubt was there now, a small nagging voice that asked, what if? Cara came down from the barn frame and walked over, her expression guarded. What did he want? To make trouble? Lucas looked at her, at the soot on her hands and the sweat on her brow, at the way she stood ready to defend herself even though he had given her no reason to. He accused you of starting the fire. Her face went very still. Did he? He did. And I told him to leave. He hesitated, then asked, where were you that night, before the fire? The hurt in her eyes was immediate and devastating. You think I did this? No, I need to know. For myself. She took a step back, and the distance between them felt like a chasm. I was on the road with the herd. We had camped about a mile north near the old oak. I saw the smoke and came to investigate. That is all. And the lantern, I never touched your lantern, Lucas. I never set foot on your property until that night. Her voice was tight, controlled, but he could hear the anger beneath it. If you do not believe me, say so now. I will leave and you will never see me again. He wanted to believe her. Every instinct told him to believe her. But the doubt was there, planted by Moss, watered by his own fear and exhaustion. I do believe you, he said, and heard the lie in his own voice. Cara heard it too. She turned without another word and walked to the pasture where her herd was grazing. Lucas watched her go and felt something break inside him. She did not speak to him for the rest of the day. They worked in silence, the easy companionship of the past weeks gone, replaced by a cold formality that hurt more than anger would have. When the sun set, Cara returned to her camp by the herd and did not come to the fire. Lucas sat alone, staring into the flames, and hated himself. He did not sleep that night. He lay in his cabin, staring at the ceiling, and thought about the fire, about the lantern, about the way the barn had burned so fast, too fast for just a spark, unless it had help, unless someone had made sure it would catch. But Cara had saved him. She had risked her life to pull him from the flames. That was not the action of someone who wanted him dead. That was the action of someone who cared. The realization hit him like a physical blow. She cared. She had stayed, not because she owed him, not because she wanted his land, but because she cared. And he had repaid that care with suspicion and doubt. He got up before dawn and walked to the ruin of the barn. The ash was still there, a gray carpet over the stone foundation, and he stood in the center of it and tried to remember that night. The storm, the lightning, the lantern. He had hung it on the hook by the door. He was sure of it now, the memory clear and sharp. He had checked the mare, calmed her, and then started toward the door. And that was when he had smelled smoke. The lantern had still been on the hook. He remembered seeing it, the flame burning steady as he ran for the animals. Which meant it had not been moved, which meant the fire had started in the loft, just as he had thought. He walked to the corner where the loft had been and crouched down, sifting through the ash with his hands. Most of it was too far gone to tell anything, but near the base of the wall he found what he was looking for. A scorch mark on the stone, blackened and blistered, directly below where the roof vent had been. Lightning strike. It had to be. Relief flooded through him, sharp and overwhelming. Cara had been telling the truth. Of course she had, and he had doubted her. He stood and walked to her camp. She was awake, sitting by a small fire, her arms wrapped around her knees. She looked up as he approached, her expression wary. "I am sorry," he said. She did not respond. "I was wrong to doubt you. The fire was lightning. I found the scorch mark. You were telling the truth, and I should have believed you from the start. But you did not." Her voice was flat. "You listened to that man and you doubted me." "I did, and I am sorry. I was tired and afraid and I let him get into my head, but that is no excuse." He sat down across from her, the fire between them. "You have been nothing but kind to me. You saved my life. You stayed to help me rebuild, and I repaid that by questioning your honor. I am sorry, Cara, truly." She was quiet for a long time, staring into the fire. Then she said, "Do you know what it is like? To have people look at you and see only a monster. To have every kindness questioned, every action scrutinized because of the color of your skin and the shape of your teeth." "No," he said quietly. "I do not. It is exhausting, and for a moment I thought you were different. I thought you saw me, but you are the same as the rest. I am not." He leaned forward, willing her to look at him. "I am not the same, Cara. I made a mistake. I let fear and doubt cloud my judgment, but I do see you. I see your strength and your kindness and your courage, and I am sorry I made you think otherwise." She looked up then, and her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Why should I believe you? Because I am telling the truth, and because I will spend as long as it takes proving it to you." He held out his hand across the fire. "Please, give me a chance to make this right." She looked at his hand for a long moment, then reached out and took it. Her grip was strong, her skin warm despite the cool morning air. "One chance, Lucas. That is all you get. That is all I need." They went back to work that day, and slowly, carefully, the wall between them began to crumble. Lucas made a point of asking her opinion on every decision, of listening when she spoke, of showing her that he valued her not just for her strength but for her mind. And Cara, cautious but willing, began to trust him again. The barn took shape plank by plank. The frame went up first, strong and sturdy, and then the walls, each board cut and fitted with care. Lucas had never been much of a carpenter. His father had hired men for that, but Cara's knowledge filled the gaps, and together they made it work. It was not quick. Some days they made good progress, the structure growing before their eyes. Other days they spent hours on a single joint trying to get it right. But it was theirs, built with their own hands, and that mattered. They fell into a rhythm. Wake at dawn, work until the sun was high, break for a meal, work until evening. Then sit by the fire and talk, about everything and nothing, until the stars came out. Lucas learned that Cara had a talent for whittling, that she could carve animals and birds from scraps of wood with a skill that seemed almost magical. She learned that he could not carry a tune to save his life, but loved to sing anyway. mangling old ballads until she laughed so hard she cried. He learned that her favorite food was honeyed oats, that she hated the cold, that she dreamed of a farm with a view of the mountains. She learned that he was afraid of spiders, that he had never been farther than 50 miles from the farm, that he missed his father every single day. And somewhere in the middle of it all, without meaning to, they fell in love. It was not a sudden thing. There was no single moment where everything changed. It was gradual, creeping up on them in the small hours between work and rest. It was in the way she saved him the last of the coffee every morning, the way he learned the names of her cattle and greeted them when he passed. It was in the way she smiled when she saw him, the way he found excuses to stand close to her. It was in the silence that was no longer awkward but comfortable, the kind of silence that only exists between two people who understand each other. Lucas did not name it, not at first. He told himself it was gratitude or friendship, or simply the bond that forms between people who work toward a common goal. But he knew, deep down, that it was more than that. He knew it the first time she laughed at one of his jokes, a real laugh that lit up her whole face. He knew it the first time he woke up and his first thought was of her. He just did not know what to do about it. The kiss in the ashes had happened that first night, in the shadow of the burning barn, when grief and relief tangled together into something he could not name. He had not planned it. He had simply leaned over, cupped her face in his hands and pressed his lips to hers. She had frozen for a moment, surprised, and then she had kissed him back, fierce and hungry, and for a few heartbeats the world had narrowed to just the two of them, ash and smoke and the taste of her mouth. Then she had pulled away, her eyes wide, and said, "Why did you do that?" "I do not know," he had said, and it was the truth. They had not spoken of it since. It hung between them, a moment neither acknowledged but neither forgot, and Lucas did not know if she regretted it or wanted it to happen again. He was afraid to ask, afraid that naming it would break whatever fragile thing was growing between them. But the wanting was there, a constant ache in his chest. He wanted to kiss her again. He wanted to hold her, to tell her that she was the best thing that had ever walked into his life, that the thought of her leaving made him feel like the ground was crumbling beneath his feet. He wanted to ask her to stay, not just for the rebuilding but forever. He did not say any of it. He was a farmer, not a poet, and the words tangled in his throat every time he tried, so he showed her instead. He made sure she had the warmest blanket at night. He fixed the fence on her pasture without being asked. He carved her name into the doorframe of the barn, small and subtle, where only someone looking for it would see, and he hoped it was enough. The trouble came again on a cold morning in early autumn. Lucas was up on the barn roof, fitting shingles when he heard the sound of horses. He looked down to see Moss and his sons riding up the path, along with 3 other men from the village. They dismounted in a loose semicircle around the barn, their faces hard. "Thorne," Moss called up. "We need to talk." Lucas climbed down, his heart sinking. Cara was in the pasture with the herd, too far to hear, and he was suddenly, acutely aware of how alone he was. "What do you want, Moss?" "We have been patient," Moss said. "We gave you time to come to your senses. But you are still harboring that orc, and people are getting nervous. Cara has done nothing wrong. So you keep saying. But we have been talking to folks, and some interesting things have come to light." Moss pulled a piece of paper from his coat pocket and unfolded it. 3 farms burned in the Northern Territory last year. All of them had orc drovers passing through just before the fires. Coincidence? Lucas felt his stomach drop. That has nothing to do with Cara. Does it not? She is a drover. She was in the area, and now your barn has burned. Moss stepped closer, his voice low and dangerous. "I think she has been running a scheme, Thorne, Burn-out farmers offer to help get herself established on their land, and you are too blind to see it. That is insane. She saved my life. Or she saved her investment. Moss folded the paper and tucked it away. Either way, we are here to make sure she leaves, peacefully if possible, but she is leaving. No. Lucas stepped between Moss and the pasture, his hands clenched into fists. You have no right, we have every right. This is human land, Thorne. And we do not want orcs on it. One of the other men stepped forward, a cudgel in his hand. Now step aside or we will move you aside. Lucas did not move. His heart was pounding so hard he thought it might burst, and his hands were shaking, but he did not move. If you want her, you go through me. Moss sighed. So be it. The man with the cudgel raised his arm, and Lucas braced himself for the blow, but it never came. There was a roar, low and furious, and then Cara was there, stepping between Lucas and the men with her fists clenched and her eyes blazing. You will not touch him, she said, and her voice was like stone. Moss smiled, a cold, satisfied thing. There it is. The orc shows her true colors. I have done nothing to you or yours, Cara said. I have been on this land for 2 months, working alongside Lucas to rebuild what the lightning destroyed. If you have accusations, make them, but do not threaten him. We are not threatening, we are protecting. Moss gestured to the men with him. There have been fires, Oral. Fires that follow you. You cannot deny that. I can and I do. I have never set a fire in my life. Cara's voice was steady, but Lucas could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands trembled just slightly. If there were fires in the north, I know nothing of them. I was working on the Greaves Ranch until 6 months ago, and the owner will vouch for me. The owner is dead. Then ask his son. Ask anyone who worked there. I am not a fire starter, Moss. I am a drover and a builder, and I have done nothing but honest work. Moss shook his head. Words are easy, Oral. Proof is harder. Then what proof do you want? Lucas stepped forward, his fear burning away into anger. You want to see the scorch mark on the stone where the lightning hit. You want to check the lantern I left hanging by the door, untouched. You want to hear from the men in town who sold me timber, who saw Cara working beside me every day, never causing trouble, never asking for anything. We want her gone, one of the other men said. That is all. Well, she is not going. This is my land and she is my guest, and you have no right to tell me otherwise. Lucas's voice was shaking now, but he did not care. If you have a problem with that, take it to the magistrate, but until then, get off my property. Moss studied him for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he said, You are making a mistake, Thorne, and when she burns you out again, do not come crying to us. He turned and mounted his horse, the other men following suit. They rode off down the path, and Lucas stood there, shaking, until they were out of sight. Then his knees gave out, and he sat down hard in the dirt. Cara knelt beside him, her hand on his shoulder. Are you all right? Am I all right? He laughed, a ragged, desperate sound. They wanted to hurt you, Cara, maybe kill you, and I just stood there. You stood between them and me. That was more than I expected. She squeezed his shoulder gently. Thank you. He looked up at her, at the green skin and the tusks and the dark eyes that had haunted his dreams for weeks, and the words he had been holding back came tumbling out. I love you. She went very still. What? I love you. I have been trying not to, trying to tell myself it is just gratitude or loneliness or anything else, but it is not. It is love. I love you, Cara, and I do not want you to leave. Ever. He took a shaky breath. I know that is selfish. I know you have a herd to sell and land to buy and a life that does not include a rundown farm in the middle of nowhere. But I had to tell you, because if I did not, I would regret it for the rest of my life. She was quiet for so long that he thought he had ruined everything. Then she said very softly, I love you too. He stared at her. You do? I do. I have for weeks. Maybe since that first night when you shared your blanket and your fire with a stranger." She smiled, and it was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. "I told myself I would sell the herd and move on, that I could not stay here, that it would be too complicated. But I do not want to leave, Lucas. I want to stay. With you." He reached up and cupped her face in his hands, the way he had that night in the ashes, and kissed her. It was soft and tentative, nothing like the desperate kiss they had shared before, but it was real. It was a promise. When they broke apart, she was smiling. "So what do we do now?" "Now," he stood, pulling her up with him. "Now we finish the barn, and then we figure out the rest." They worked twice as hard after that, driven by a shared purpose. The barn had to be finished before the first snow, and autumn was slipping away fast. They worked through rain and wind, through days so cold their breath misted in the air, and slowly, steadily, the barn took shape. The roof went on, shingle by shingle. The doors were hung heavy and solid. The loft was rebuilt stronger than before, and through it all they talked about the future, about what it would mean for Cara to stay, for them to build a life together, about the prejudice they would face, the challenges, the risks, but also about the small joys, the way they worked together, anticipating each other's needs without words, the way she made him laugh, the way he made her feel safe. "I will sell the herd," Cara said one evening as they sat by the fire. "Use the money to buy supplies for the farm, seeds for spring, maybe some chickens." "You do not have to do that," Lucas said. "The herd is yours, your future." "My future is here, with you." She leaned against him, her head on his shoulder. "Besides, I am a terrible drover. I get attached to the cattle. I have names for all of them," he laughed. "I noticed. What is the big one called again? The one with the crooked horn?" "Barnabas." "Barnabas." He shook his head. "You are a strange woman, Cara Oral. And you are a strange man, Lucas Thorne." She tilted her head up to look at him, "But I would not have it any other way." The barn was finished 3 days before the first snow. They stood back and looked at it, this thing they had built together, and Lucas felt a swell of pride so strong it almost hurt. It was not perfect. The walls were a little crooked in places, and the roof sagged slightly on one side. But it was solid. It was real. It was theirs. "We did it," Cara said, and her voice was full of wonder. "We did." He took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "Thank you for everything. Thank you for letting me stay." They moved the animals into the barn that night, bedding them down in fresh straw. The mare seemed pleased with her new stall, and the cows settled in without complaint. Even the chickens, who had been roosting in the trees for months, seemed happy to be under a roof again. When the work was done, Lucas and Cara stood in the doorway, looking out at the farm. The fields were brown and dormant, waiting for spring. The cabin was small and weathered, its chimney puffing smoke into the cold air. It was not much, but it was home. "I need to go to Milford," Cara said, "to sell the herd. It will take a week, maybe 2. I will come with you." She shook her head. "You need to stay here. Prepare for winter. I will be fine." "Cara, I will be fine, Lucas. I have been doing this for 5 years." She squeezed his hand. "And I will come back, I promise." He wanted to argue, to insist on going with her, but he knew she was right. There was too much to do here, too much that could not wait. So he nodded, even though it felt like his heart was being torn in two. "Be careful." "I will." She left the next morning, driving the herd south along the road. Lucas watched her go until she was out of sight, and then he went back to work. There was firewood to split, fences to mend, 100 small tasks that needed doing before the snow set in. He threw himself into the work, trying not to think about how empty the farm felt without her. The week stretched into 2, and Lucas began to worry. The weather had turned cold, the first flurries of snow dusting the fields, and there had been no word from Cara. He told himself that she was fine, that the journey had simply taken longer than expected, but the worry gnawed at him. And then, on the 15th day, she came back. He was in the barn feeding the mare when he heard the sound of hooves. He dropped the bucket and ran outside, and there she was, riding a sturdy gray gelding, a pack tied behind the saddle. She slid down from the horse and walked to him, and he caught her in his arms, holding her so tightly he thought he might break her. "You came back," he said, his voice muffled against her hair. "I promised I would." She pulled back just enough to look at him. "Did you doubt me?" "No, maybe." "A little," he laughed, shaky with relief. "I missed you." "I missed you too." She kissed him, and it was like coming home. They went inside, and she told him about the trip. The herd had sold for a good price, better than she had hoped, and she had used the money to buy supplies. Seeds and tools and 2 young heifers, sturdy stock that would be the foundation of their own herd. And the horse, because she could not bear the thought of walking back. "I also bought this," she said, pulling a small wooden box from her pack. Lucas opened it and found 2 simple gold rings inside. "Cara, I know we have not talked about it, but I want to marry you, Lucas, if you will have me." He stared at the rings, his throat tight with emotion. "Are you sure? It will not be easy. People will talk. They will make trouble." "Let them." She took his hand, her grip strong and sure. "I do not care what they think. I care about you, about us, about building a life together." She paused, then added, "But only if you want it too." He pulled her close, the box still clutched in his hand. "I want you. Forever." They were married 3 days later in the small chapel in the village. The priest was reluctant at first, but Lucas was insistent, and in the end he agreed. There were no guests. Moss and the others had made it clear that they would not attend, and Lucas did not care. This was not for them. It was for him and Cara, a promise made in front of witnesses and sealed with rings. Cara wore a simple green dress that matched her skin, and Lucas wore his father's best shirt, carefully mended. They stood in front of the altar and spoke their vows, their voices steady and sure, and when the priest pronounced them husband and wife, Lucas kissed her like it was the first time and the last time and every time in between. They walked back to the farm hand in hand, the winter sun pale and cold above them. When they reached the cabin, Lucas swept Cara up in his arms and carried her over the threshold, and she laughed, bright and joyous, and he thought his heart might burst. That night they lay together in the small bed, tangled in blankets and each other, and talked about the future. About the farm they would build, the crops they would plant, the animals they would raise. About the children they might have one day if they were lucky. About growing old together, watching the seasons turn, building something that would last. "You think it will be enough?" Cara asked softly. "This life, this farm?" Lucas thought about it, about the barn they had built together, about the land that was now theirs, about the woman in his arms who had saved his life and stolen his heart. "It will be more than enough," he said. "It will be everything." The winter was hard, but they faced it together. Snow piled high against the cabin walls, and the wind howled through the trees, but the barn held strong and the animals stayed warm. Lucas and Cara spent the long dark evenings by the fire, planning for spring, talking and laughing and simply being together. When the snow finally melted and the first green shoots appeared in the fields, they planted the seeds Cara had brought back from Milford. Wheat and barley and oats, row after careful row, their hands working in tandem. The 2 heifers grazed in the upper pasture, sleek and healthy, and Lucas built a new coop for the chickens. The neighbors kept their distance, and Lucas was grateful for it. He did not need their approval or their friendship. He had everything he needed right here. Cara proved to be as skilled a farmer as she was a builder. She had a knack for knowing when to plant and when to harvest, when to water and when to let the fields rest. Under her guidance, the farm began to thrive in a way it never had before. The crops grew tall and strong, the animals fattened, and by the time autumn came around again, they had enough to see them through the winter and some to sell. Lucas took the surplus to market, and when he came back, he had enough coin to buy a plow and a second horse. "We are doing well," he told Cara that night, counting the money out on the table. "Better than I ever thought we would." "We are doing well because we work together," she said, covering his hand with hers. "That is the secret, Lucas. We are stronger together than we ever were apart." He kissed her, slow and sweet, and thought about how lucky he was. The seasons turned. Winter gave way to spring, spring to summer, summer to autumn. The farm grew and prospered, and so did they. They added a room to the cabin, then another, building space for the family they hoped to have one day. They bought more cattle, expanded the fields, repaired the old stone wall that marked the boundary of the property, and through it all, they loved each other. Not in the desperate, passionate way of the early days, though that was still there, but in the steady, enduring way of two people who have chosen each other every single day. In the way, Cara made coffee just the way Lucas liked it, strong and sweet. In the way, Lucas always saved her the best cuts of meat. In the small kindnesses and the shared labor and the quiet moments at the end of the day when they sat together and watched the sun set over their land. It was not always easy. There were arguments, of course, disagreements about how to run the farm or how to spend their money. There were hard days when the work felt endless and the future uncertain. There were moments when the weight of the world pressed down on them, and they wondered if they had made the right choice. But they always came back to each other, always talked it through, always found a way forward. Because that was what love was, Lucas realized. Not the grand gestures or the sweeping declarations, but the choice to stay, to work, to build something together even when it was hard. In the spring of their third year together, Cara told him she was pregnant. He had been in the barn, mucking out stalls when she came to find him. She did not say anything at first, just stood in the doorway watching him work, and when he looked up and saw the expression on her face, he knew. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "I am sure." She crossed to him, took his hands in hers. "Are you happy?" He pulled her into his arms, holding her as carefully as if she were made of glass. "I am terrified, and happier than I have ever been in my life." The pregnancy was not easy. Cara was sick for the first few months, barely able to keep anything down, and Lucas hovered over her like a mother hen until she snapped at him to give her some space. He tried to take on more of the work to let her rest, but she was stubborn and insisted on doing her share. They compromised. She would do the lighter tasks and he would handle the heavy lifting. It was not perfect, but it worked. As her belly grew, so did Lucas's anxiety. He read every book he could find on childbirth, talked to every woman in the village who would speak to him, and drove Cara half mad with his worrying. But she endured it with patience and humor, teasing him gently when he fussed too much and holding him when the fear became too great. The baby came on a cold night in early winter, 3 weeks before they expected. Lucas had gone to fetch the midwife, a gruff old woman named Hetty who lived on the edge of the village, and by the time they returned, Cara was already in labor. It was long and difficult, and there were moments when Lucas thought he might lose both of them, but Hetty was skilled and Cara was strong, and when the sun rose the next morning, they had a son. He was small and perfect, with green skin like his mother and dark eyes like his father, and when Lucas held him for the first time, he felt something shift inside him, a love so fierce and overwhelming it stole his breath. "What should we call him?" Cara asked, her voice weak but happy. Lucas looked down at the tiny face, at the small hands curled into fists, and said, "Yoren, after your father." Cara's eyes filled with tears. Are you sure? I am sure. He was a builder and so is our son. He will build a future just like we did. Yoren grew quickly, a happy, healthy baby who rarely cried and smiled at everything. He had his mother's strength and his father's stubbornness, and Lucas loved him more than he thought it was possible to love anything. Cara was a natural mother, patient and loving, and watching her with their son made Lucas fall in love with her all over again. The farm continued to prosper. They hired a young man from the village to help with the heavy work, a quiet boy named Peter who did not care that Cara was an orc and worked hard for his pay. With the extra help, they were able to expand even further, buying the adjoining field and planting it with apple trees. It would be years before the trees bore fruit, but Lucas liked the idea of building something that would outlast him, something Yoren could inherit. The neighbors slowly began to accept Cara's presence. It helped that the farm was doing well, that Lucas and Cara paid their debts and kept to themselves. It helped that Yoren was a charming child who waved at everyone he saw. It helped that time had a way of smoothing over old prejudices, of making the strange familiar. Moss never apologized, but he stopped making trouble, and that was enough. When Yoren was 2, Cara told Lucas she was pregnant again. This time it was easier, both the pregnancy and the birth, and their daughter came into the world on a warm spring morning, screaming her displeasure at being removed from the womb. She had her mother's green skin and her father's nose, and they named her Cassidy, because Cara had always loved the name. Cassidy was as different from Yoren as night from day. Where he was calm and content, she was loud and demanding. Where he was happy to sit and watch the world, she wanted to be in the middle of everything, grabbing and climbing and exploring. She exhausted them both, but she also filled the house with laughter and life, and Lucas could not imagine the farm without her. The years passed in a blur of work and family and small joys. Yoren learned to walk, then to talk, then to help with the chores. Cassidy followed close behind, always trying to keep up with her older brother. The farm grew and changed, adding a new barn for storage, a workshop for Lucas, a small garden where Cara grew vegetables and herbs. They were not rich, but they were comfortable. They had enough to eat and a warm place to sleep in each other. And that, Lucas thought, was more than most people could say. One evening when Yoren was 5 and Cassidy was 3, Lucas and Cara sat on the porch of their cabin and watched the sun set over the fields. The children were asleep inside, tired from a day of play, and the farm was quiet except for the occasional low of a cow or the rustle of the wind through the apple trees. "You remember that first night?" Lucas asked, his arm around Cara's shoulders. "When the barn burned, I remember." She leaned into him, her head resting against his chest. "You were so stubborn, sitting there in the ashes, refusing to move. I did not know what else to do. I had lost everything. Not everything. You still had the land and the animals, and me, though you did not know it yet." She smiled. "That kiss surprised me, you know. I thought you were in shock." "I was, but I also knew even then that I did not want you to leave." He kissed the top of her head. "Best decision I ever made, kissing me, letting you stay." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the colors bleed across the sky. Then Cara said, "I am glad the barn burned." Lucas pulled back to look at her, surprised. "You are?" "I am, because if it had not, I would have kept moving south. I would have sold the herd and bought land somewhere else, and I never would have met you. I never would have had this life, this family." She gestured to the farm, to the cabin, to the land that stretched out before them. "So yes, I am glad. Even though it was terrible at the time, even though you lost so much, I am glad. Because it brought us together." Lucas thought about that, about the lightning and the fire and the fear, about the moment when he thought he would die and the moment when Cara pulled him from the flames. About the kiss in the ashes, desperate and unplanned, that had started everything. "I am glad too," he said. They stayed on the porch until the stars came out, holding each other and talking about nothing in particular. When the cold finally drove them inside, they checked on the children, tucking blankets around small sleeping forms. And then they went to bed themselves, curled together in the warmth of their room. Lucas lay awake for a while, listening to Cara's breathing slow and even beside him, and thought about how far they had come. From that first terrible night to this moment of perfect peace. From strangers to lovers to husband and wife to parents. From a burned-out ruin to a thriving farm. It had not been easy. There had been setbacks and struggles, prejudice and pain. But they had faced it together, and that had made all the difference. He thought about the barn they had built, plank by plank, and realized that they had built their life the same way. One day at a time, one choice at a time, one act of love at a time. It was not grand or dramatic. It was simple and honest and real, and it was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything. Lucas closed his eyes and let himself drift off to sleep, his hand resting on Cara's hip, his heart full of gratitude for the woman who had saved his life and given him a reason to live. For the children who filled their days with noise and laughter. For the farm that had been his father's and was now his, a legacy he would pass on to his son. For the kiss in the ashes that had changed everything. And for the love that had grown from those ashes, strong and enduring, a fire that would never go out. The morning sun rose over the farm, painting the fields in gold, and a new day began. Lucas and Cara woke with the dawn, as they always did, and went about their work. There were animals to feed and crops to tend, children to dress and meals to cook. It was the same routine they followed every day, familiar and comforting in its predictability. But it was also new because every day with Cara was a gift, every moment with their children a treasure. Lucas never forgot that, never took it for granted. He had learned on that terrible night when the barn burned, how quickly everything could be taken away. And he had learned in the months and years that followed how precious it was to have something worth holding on to. So he held on. To Cara, to their children, to the farm and the life they had built together. He held on with both hands and refused to let go. And when the day was done and the work was finished and the children were asleep, he sat with his wife on the porch and watched the sun set over their land, and felt nothing but gratitude for the fire that had brought them together, for the love that had saved them both, for the life they had built from the ashes, strong and true and lasting, for each other. The stars came out one by one, filling the sky with light, and Lucas took Cara's hand in his and held it tight. They did not speak. There was no need. Everything that mattered had already been said, in the way they looked at each other, in the way they worked side by side, in the way they had chosen each other every single day since that first night. And as the darkness settled over the farm, soft and gentle, Lucas thought about the future. About the years to come, the seasons that would turn, the children who would grow. About the apple trees that would bear fruit and the fields that would yield harvest after harvest. About growing old with Cara, watching their grandchildren play in the yard, building a legacy that would last long after they were gone. It was a good future. A future worth fighting for, worth working for, worth living for. And it had all started with a fire, a rescue, and a kiss in the ashes. Lucas smiled and squeezed Cara's hand, and she squeezed back, and they sat together in the peaceful darkness, two souls who had found each other against all odds and refused to let go. The farm slept around them, quiet and content, and somewhere in the distance an owl called. its voice echoing across the fields. The world turned as it always did, and the stars wheeled overhead, and Lucas and Cara sat together and dreamed of tomorrow. Together. Always together. From that first night in the ashes to this moment and every moment yet to come. Through fire and rebuilding, through prejudice and acceptance, through struggle and triumph, through all the small ordinary days that made up a life together. And that was enough.